It is so bizarre that this game exists at all. Dead Space Extraction is a prequel to Dead Space, a spin-off of Dead Space, an on-rails shooter, and a Nintendo Wii exclusive. It's a weird combination. Whatever business executive approved and funded this project was off their freaking rocker that day. Literally, no one bought this game. Supposedly, less than 20,000 copies were sold in North America. That's lifetime sales. Like Mythmaker's Orbs of Doom sold more copies than this game. But that should have been obvious to everyone. Anyone could have predicted those sales. It's an extremely violent and disturbing horror game, released on the notoriously grandma-friendly Nintendo Wii. It's also a prequel to a game that didn't even release on the Wii. Like, did anyone check whether fans of Dead Space even owned the system? Moreover, do fans of Dead Space want to play an on-rails shooter? Where is the audience for this game? In spite of its bizarre concept and atrociously low sales, Dead Space Extraction is actually mostly a really good game. I'm gonna say something crazy and declare that I liked Extraction way more than either Dead Space 2 or 3. And freaking forget about the even more bizarre abomination that was Dead Space Ignition. That's right, I'm saying Dead Space Extraction is easily the second best game in the series. Dead Space Extraction was a part of a weird rail shooter renaissance that took place on the Nintendo Wii. For a couple of years, there were a bunch of really good rail shooters released back to back on the system, like the shockingly good Link's Crossbow Training. For real, Link's Crossbow Training? Awesome. I wish there was a weird rail shooter spin-off for every Zelda game. And there were other horror series spin-offs like Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and House of the Dead Overkill. There was a surprising amount of competition for Best Nintendo Wii Horror Franchise Spin-off Rail Shooter. And Dead Space Extraction wins that title pretty handily because it's really good, at least most of the time. Dead Space is a surprisingly good setting for a rail shooter because rail shooters are all about accuracy, and Dead Space's gameplay, which is focused on shooting off limbs of bizarre undead mutant monsters, is also all about accuracy. It's a really solid marriage of gameplay styles. Visually, this game looks awesome. Realistic graphics tended to not do very well on the technically underpowered Wii, but Visceral Games did a fantastic job of bringing the gritty mechanical industrial sci-fi horror of Dead Space to the Wii. There are some bombastic killer scenes where you're flying around the outside of the Ishimura that I was surprised the Wii was even capable of. The original Dead Space had such a striking visual and audio style, and all of that has been faithfully and meticulously recreated here. All the sound effects, the screams, the brutal Planet Cracker spaceship ambiance, it's all here and it all looks and sounds great. It's not just the environments but the enemies too. The necromorph models and animations look closer to their PS3 and 360 counterparts than I would have thought possible. These necromorphs are hideous and gooey and slimy and freaking gross. This is one of the best looking games on the system. It's also one of the most stressful and frustrating games I've ever played in my life. This game is only 6 hours long, but it's so stressful to play it feels like every play session lasts for an entire week. The Dead Space series has always been pretty stressful. It's a game about getting trapped alone in dark, sparking metallic spaceship corridors, and getting chased down by some of the most nightmarish monsters I've ever seen in any video game or movie. Dead Space occupies a weird place for me, where I really like it and I think the games are awesome, but I never actually enjoy playing them. The whole time I'm playing, I'm like, when do I get to stop putting myself through this horrific experience? Like, compared to other horror franchises like Resident Evil, Dead Space is kind of just not fun to play. And yet, that's what makes it such a great horror series. It is so terrifying and awful that I feel more immersed and scared while playing Dead Space than almost any other horror game. In the original Dead Space, you could pretty much explore the Ishimura at whatever pace you wanted. If you wanted to take it slow and explore every nook and cranny, you could do that. If you got overwhelmed or scared during a monster encounter, you could kind of slow it down and take it easy for a while afterwards. Dead Space had a lot of spots where you could manage your inventory to prepare yourself for the next encounter, make sure you had the right weapons for the job. In Extraction, the game never ever stops moving. It is always dragging you forward to the next horrific wave of monsters, whether you're ready for it or not. It feels like you never get a breather, never get a chance to calm down, never get a moment to relax. And those waves of monsters are crazy. You will kill hundreds of monsters per level. Wave after wave of nightmarish, screaming, horrible, disgusting monsters. And they are so fast. The monsters are racing straight at you, getting right up in your face. It is relentless and overwhelming. What makes this even more stressful is that you never ever have anything close to enough ammo to deal with all these monsters. I played virtually the entire game one clip away from being totally screwed at all times. There were multiple times when I just ran out of ammo and was stuck with the painfully slow and clunky rivet gun, at which point you might as well just lay down and die. What makes the game frustrating is that the camera is actively working against you. The developers set up the camera in a way that purposefully makes you miss out on picking up ammo, weapons, and upgrades. Now during combat, the camera usually stays still, so you can aim at enemy weak points. But during cutscenes, the camera is flying all over the place. This is some of the most nauseating shaky cam I've ever seen anywhere. If you want to throw up all over yourself, play this game, it'll do the trick. This camera flies by ammunition. Your weapons can all be totally empty, and even though you are surrounded by ammo, there are times when you cannot pick up any of it because this stupid camera will just not hold still. For real, no joke, this camera will spend 30 minutes straight staring at this girl's freaking ass, but will not look at ammo for more than half a millisecond. And it's not just ammo, it's also absolutely necessary weapon upgrades and entire weapons. That's right, you can miss entire weapons in this game because of the camera. The plasma cutter is the most basic and most useful weapon in the game, and I went half my playthrough without it because I happened to miss the one time the camera flew past the gun before I had a chance to grab it. Are you the kind of player who likes to pick up every note and audio log so you can learn more about the game's story? Well, play a different game, loser. Dead Space Extraction's camera will never allow you to pick all those up. This camera sucks ass. There were times when the camera would be ready to move on to the next room and I would be like, no, don't you dare. There is ammo literally right beside me. If the camera would just turn and let me look at it for 1 second, come on. However, with all that said, that stress perfectly matches the content of the game. You are fighting through a horrific alien outbreak out of which you have basically no chance of survival. This is how that should feel. It should feel stressful and frustrating and overwhelming. It's not fun, but it is immersive. I know it kind of sounds like I hate the game because I kind of do, but also Dead Space Extraction is science fiction horror at its absolute best and most terrifying. The production values are crazy. The audio-visual design is phenomenal. It's a really good horror game, but god dang is it frustrating to play. The story of Dead Space Extraction is really interesting. It fills in a lot of gaps in the original game's story. Dead Space Extraction starts at the exact moment of the outbreak of madness on the Aegis 7 colony, and proceeds from there all the way to the exact moment of Isaac Clarke's arrival on the by then completely overrun Ishimura planet cracker. Dead Space was a game that took place after the disaster had already occurred, with your character picking through the rubble in ruins, discovering what had happened, while Extraction is set in the middle of that disaster, and chronicles it all the way to its bloody end. I gotta say, seeing the Aegis 7 colony was really cool. In the original game, you only visit the colony for like 2 seconds at the very end, and it just looks like a barren wasteland. But it turns out there's this whole sci-fi city of miners on the planet, and very briefly in Extraction you get to see what daily life is like there. As a huge fan of both Dead Space and science fiction generally, it was really cool. However, once the game gets back onto the Ishimura, it ends up retreading a lot of old ground from the first game. Like, you're fighting through a lot of the exact same levels from the first game with identical layouts, which I found a little disappointing. I would would have liked more new material. Extraction intersects with the original game's story in some cool ways. Like, in order to seal doors, your character will have to retract these power generators that Isaac will then spend half the first game putting back in so he can advance through the ship. Or like how your character shut down the Ishimura's self-defense cannons so they can escape, which becomes a whole disaster that Isaac has to deal with in Dead Space. It's pretty cool how you can do things that actually affect how the story goes in the first game. At Dead Space Extraction's start, you're playing as Sam Caldwell, a miner who is transporting the newly discovered marker. You see a flash, something goes wrong, and then you are attacked by your fellow miners, who have gone violently insane. However, at the end of the level, it turns out that you were the crazy one, and you just murdered all of your friends and coworkers in a deranged murder spree. Your character is killed by Detective Nathan McNeil, and then you switch over to controlling McNeil, who becomes the main character. The way this game switches characters is one of the story's coolest bits. Anyway, at security headquarters, McNeil is dealing with a sudden surge of reports of violent attacks and suicides across the colony, during which he meets Gabe Weller, an old friend and security officer from the Ishimura, who has come to retrieve some corpses from the morgue. The morgue turns out to be empty and full of more violently crazed miners. And then from there, all hell has broken loose. The colony has pretty much immediately descended into total and absolute chaos, with things burning down, exploding, and colonists killing each other. McNeil and Weller return to HQ, which is already overrun by necromorphs. There they find Lexine, who was Sam Caldwell's, the first playable character's, girlfriend. They make a run for the shuttle bay to escape the colony, which is already swamped with refugees. One of these shuttles crashes, killing everyone and destroying all the shuttles. Uh-oh. We find a fourth survivor, Warren Eckhart, and now our cast of characters is complete. Eckhart is a cowardly company executive who seems to have a weird obsession with Lexine, but the reason for that will be revealed later. Eckhart knows where another shuttle is, and after some more monster killing, our characters reach it and escape the colony. Out in space, the Ishimura has issued a no-fly order and says it will attack any shuttle from the colony that tries to land. This other shuttle gets destroyed, and while dodging energy blasts, our shuttle crashes into the ship's hull. One spacewalk later, and we're inside, only to discover that the necromorph outbreak on board the Ishimura has already begun. After fighting through the necromorphs, our character is knocked out by ship security, who suspect you of being infected. On the quarantine deck, you get to see Lexine naked. Oh, YouTube demonetization, here I come. Also, you meet Nicole, who is still alive and largely unaware of the outbreak. This is very exciting because if you remember anything about the first game's story, it's that Isaac spends the entire game looking for Nicole. There's some vague talk here about Lexine having heightened brain activity and maybe being immune to the marker's effects, but it's not very clear. Anyway, from there, you battle through necromorphs for a while until Lexine gets sucked down this drain, which really upsets Eckhart. We meet Dr. Karen Howell for 2 seconds, who runs away when you get attacked by a giant monster. Also, this boss fight is a humongous pain if you don't happen to have the correct weapons with you. If you didn't have the magical foresight to bring along a weapon that shoots fast projectiles, go screw yourself. After the boss fight, you switch over to controlling Dr. Howell, who regrets leaving our characters to die, but she has her own problems. Here, you get to control the Ripper, which is the best weapon in the game. It's a levitating saw blade whose position in the air you control with motion controls, and it is devastating. Dr. Howell actually finds Lexine, who's just chilling in this random room for some reason. Then there's another annoying boss fight against this tank necromorph. There's a part at the end of the fight where your character stops moving and just sits and stares at the monster while it shoots an endless stream of explosive globs at you. I had no idea what the hell the game wanted me to do here. I used literally all of my ammo shooting it in the face with no effect. And it turns out you're supposed to use telekinesis to grab the globs and shoot them back in the monster's face. Would have been nice if the game could have communicated to that me in literally any way. After this, all our characters meet back up together. Eckhart is left alone with Dr. Howell, and she reveals that she knows that he's a unitologist, the religion that worships the markers. She also knows that he used his position in the company to replace most of the ship's staff with fellow unitologists. neonatologists, leading to this whole disaster. He leaves Dr. Howe to die when she's attacked, but not before revealing that his only goal is to extract Lexine from the ship, since she is apparently immune to the marker's effects, and that's important to him for some reason that is never really explained. From there, you take control of Weller, who goes with Eckhart to find a shuttle. When they do, Weller learns Eckhart's plan, and then Eckhart shoots him, but then Eckhart gets killed by a necromorph. Crime doesn't pay, boys. You get back in control of McNeil, who has to turn off the ship's self-defense system so the shuttle can escape without getting shot down. He succeeds, but then his arm gets pinned to the ship's hull by a giant monster, and to escape he has to cut off his own hand. Pretty gnarly. In the final mission of the game, you control Weller, who single-handedly drives off a horde of monsters, while Lexine starts up the shuttle and they wait for McNeil, who shows up literally at the last possible second. And then, to my great surprise, they actually all escape and set a course for the Sprawl, the setting of Dead Space 2. In the last scene, Isaac arrives on the Ishimura, beginning the events of the first game. If you're a fan of Dead Space at all, Extraction is an absolutely must-play. Not only does it match the stressful horror gameplay of the original, but it expands the world and story of the first game in ways that are genuinely essential. In spite of Extraction's terrible sales, it did receive something of a sequel. Dead Space 2 had a DLC expansion called Severed, which continued the story of the characters from Extraction. I've never played it because it was never released for PC. Pretty lame. Anyway, thank God I never have to play this game again, because while it's really cool, holy crap is it a pain in the butt to play. Oh yeah. Woo! Wee!